Well, welcome to everyone. So this is an opportunity to share a bit about our retreat coming up in January. And I've got some slides which we may or may not get to. We'll see how that goes. But these emerged out of a report I wrote on the Five Maturities for a lot of reasons, but it seemed very timely in terms of kind of what's unfolding in the world and kind of what's being asked of us and how challenged we often feel in our practice to kind of stay centered and grounded in the work that we're doing. And so this is an opportunity for you to experience the maturities for yourself and to sort of use those as resource and reflection on your own practice in terms of where you might want to focus some attention on your development. So before I get into anything that I have, I'm just curious what brought you here, if there's questions or hopes or ideas you have that would help us shape our conversation.
I'm happy to start. Grace Thomas here in Melbourne, Australia. And what brought me here? Well, I've taken a little bit of a break from Moment Institute programs and looking at the Five Maturities, it really attracted me to think about, will I lean into it for next year? So today's a good opportunity for me to
All right.
have a think about what's important for me. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So, David, so I've read your Five Maturities paper, and it's very much influenced, like, within our large organization, we're like, how can we survey and find out if we're moving the needle? And rather than ask the performative, how did the coach perform kind of questions, I've very much pivoted to, what has shifted for the leader and their way of being, and what are they able to do, right? So I think that's a key theme of your work. I very much gravitate to a fluid and integrative perspective of vertical and horizontal, and cultivating within myself, along with my clients, right? Allowing us to be present to the moment and stepping beyond the confines of competency models. So I'm fully aligning with all of that. So I feel very enlivened by your work, very kindred spirit. And then being in the Lighten Your Load program, my experience with the model is I don't get the labels and it's not clicking yet.
Okay.
Very much like my experience when I first got introduced to adult development theory. And I'm like, I don't understand any of this stuff. And now I'm like, oh, it's just a playground of exploration and fluidity and leaning into and letting go of. So I trust that I could get to that experience with the Five Maturities, but I am looking for that instructive pathway of, at what point or how do I go about helping that get rooted into my experiential and knowledge-based learning, like enough so that I feel like I've got it, so then I can also let it go.
Yeah. Okay. Can I offer you just a small tip to get you started?
Yes.
And you'll see this in one of the slides I'm going to show you, but where is to let go of the names of the maturities. So this is the second iteration. The three have stayed the same, two have changed. And they're words trying to describe large spheres, large perspectives, and trying to get them pinned down to like a rubric in your mind might be difficult as a starting point. So I would focus more on what does each one help you do?
Okay.
And then you can then create inquiry questions. So for example, when a spiritual maturity, its primary function is what can you see? And so I think about one of the common things I reflected back to many of our students is who are curious, like, well, how did you know to ask that question? Well, and I say, well, because of this. And they say, that was they weren't seeing this because they were so intent on having to coach. And I want to do the right thing as a coach that they missed a lot of what was happening. So you might say, within the organization, what are we wanting leaders to see that they're not seeing? That's causing them to behave in ways that may not be as productive. And so I think playing with what does this enable, that maturity enable them to do, will give you a way to translate into language and framings that work in your organization. And then later you can see, oh, all those are examples of, say, spiritual maturity. If you get hung up on some of the words and it's like, what does he mean by that? And it doesn't match. So for me, it's just a way of, I needed to create that sort of the 5 sets of pairs of masteries and maturities. And so these were my best efforts to describe a lot of thinking and research I had done for categories of things like maturity. And it all started with even within competency models, how do we help them be better? So part of it is even understanding, how do I need to mature my understanding even of the basic things I can do? And how do I ground that? So even as I'm scaling my learning or moving up maybe in the organization, I have a foundation for these things that people are teaching me. And so like, if maybe you're putting a leader through a conflict resolution class, I'll just make up a title. And you're teaching them all these brilliant skills and things they read and practices, but they never in their life have raised their voice, or they are totally conflict avoided, or they come from a culture where conflict has a really pejorative sense, and so you wouldn't be caught being in conflict. Well, all those things are going to undermine any use of any of the skills that you teach them, because it's going against the grain of who they are, what they believe in, what their life experience and trauma has been. And so for me, what each maturity is focused on, and even then the concept of what foundation would they need to have a better chance than average of doing what we're trying to teach them how to do. And that was even that dynamic of those two going together will help you start to get more familiar with not settling for just teaching them skills or information.
That helps me a lot. It's easier to orient to the question.
Yeah.
Like, because like the label, right? Like then I have my own preconceived, like, well, what does that mean? And all that kind of stuff. So I was trying to let it go, but then I couldn't orient to something else. That's very helpful.
Yeah, and then you get more of the latter, then you can start to see how it rolls up to these words. And even if it might be you might choose a different word, they don't really matter that much. They're just in the C words matter a lot because they're actually more explicitly descriptive. The other ones are broader categories trying to encompass quite a bit. And they were the best that I could land on. I tried a bunch of different combinations.
Thank you.
But thanks for asking. Helen, is there anything that you're bringing with you to this that you'd like to ask?
Sure. I think for me, this whole lighten your load is I'm holding a lot of stuff from way back on a personal side, and it's time to look at it.
Yeah.
A whole bunch of it. Yeah, it's related to death of a number of family members, and I just when they died, I was in my teens, my 20s, and my 30s, early 40s at the time as well for all of them. And all to say, it's very difficult to talk about that stuff in the 70s and 80s. People just may ask you how you feel, and as soon as you say something, then they change subject because it's not very comfortable for them. It's not, our society is not such that at the time, the 70s and 80s for sure. And also partly because when those things happened in my life, I was in my 20s when I lost actually 3 people, my brother, 2 brothers to accidents, workplace accidents, and my dad. All to say is most people in their 20s don't experience that much death. So, and even in their 30s. So again, it's kind of hard to, who do you really talk to about it, that whole thing. And so for me, I worked full time and went to school at night. And once I got my papers as an accountant, then I worked full time and I taught at university at night. And then I switched over into working full time. And then I was on boards of directors, those kinds of things. So I think that was kind of my way of managing with the I guess maybe the shock of all of it. And for me, it was just like I'm going to keep myself really busy, and that's what I did, and that helped me get through it. As in, it helped me when I think about it, it helped me function as a
Yeah.
person. However, now that I'm not working full time anymore, it's it's taking this opportunity because it's there and it's more at the surface level.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you
Yeah.
for sharing. Yeah.
So that's the interest for me.
Great. Mm.
Thank you.
You're most welcome. All right. Well, so this will be familiar to Helen and Jackie, but new for Grace. So we'll get Grace up to speed about more about the five maturities, and then talk about how the retreat's going to address them. Yeah. There we go. All right. So for me, the five maturities sort of form the backbone of the retreat and provide a way for us to use them to kind of navigate whatever's up in our life and our work. And because I firmly believe that we're entering into a time in the world that is very unlike what many of us were raised in a way, but is asking us not so much, have you read all the latest books, but more, can you hold bigger spaces and harder conversations and be able to pivot into things that we might find difficult and important. And so just as a way so we want to really be teaching them at Five Maturities in a way. We'll be introducing them, offering you examples, offering you resources, but part of it is because I want this to be kind of a really highly developmental space where sort of like you were alluding to, Helen, that each person can find the journey that they need to be on. Like, so for you, Jackie, it's like, how do I translate this into an organizational workspace that has maybe different frames, different meanings, different assumptions about how these things go? And then we can support you in that. And as as part of that you'll be able to connect with other people that are on a similar journey to compare notes. We've already had several people already kind of band together for that, and to help you find the things you need. And some of this will be sort of deeply engaging, moving into conversations, and each of the month-long cycles will give you plenty of chances to reflect and write for yourself and kind of do a sort of a travelogue of the journey that you're on. Yeah, and I'll explain in a little bit why it's called that, but I just want to start with this quote from Elizabeth about kind of why I'm doing this and kind of what we're about. Mm. Yeah. Yeah. So one of the things that we will focus on um, is the kind of things that help shape where you are. And I've found as I've moved through my life and I've worked with people across many, many decades, um, that there's always this sort of point of reckoning of kind of like coming to terms with certain transitions or certain age points, certain opportunities that really would behoove us to step back and reflect on, how am I being asked to mature here, or how would greater maturity here help me navigate this, be more present to this, resolve this, whatever it is that we're after. And you can't really teach maturity, in my opinion. You can teach maturity models, maturity frameworks, and bar and graphs and labels. But maturity is like stories, is often formed in retrospect. It's only when we stop and look back we think, wow, um, I've really changed in this way. Or you've just had an encounter that didn't go as you had hoped, and you stop and think, what did I miss? What did I not see? What did I not allow myself to feel or to say what that I wanted to say? And in that moment, you have an opportunity to say, here's an opening where I might have acted in a more mature way. So again, this will get us all kind of caught up to speed, and then I'll introduce the 5 maturities, and then we'll do a little practice together. But I'll let you read this about why I'm doing these. Hmm. Yeah. So the 5 maturities grew out of a reflection on a research paper some people had written using one of the models I'd created years ago, and now fast forward, and we have I'm working on projects with the EMCC and Association of Coaching and a few others to begin to think about how does this invite us to reflect on how we assess and develop coaches and what even is coaching anymore. And so again, part of what I'm hoping will come out of the Lighten Your Load, which we're just now finishing this week, as well as this retreat, is freeing ourselves to imagine new ways of working and inviting our clients in new ways of thinking about their own development. And for me, that just feels like it's a really timely piece. And so I just want to just then take a few minutes and just share a bit about the 5 maturities themselves, and then we'll give you a practice of them for yourself, and then we'll talk about the retreat itself. So for Grace, there's 4 different 4 different sets in each of these. So the first one, this is the one I was suggesting to you, Jackie, that you focus on. Because I think it's more pragmatic language that, say, a leader would appreciate. Like, but the first one is kind of what it's in service of, the maturity is in service of, and kind of what we're trying to develop in the person by helping them mature. And there's the maturity that's in the capital and the yellow letters and the bold yellow letters. The 2 below that, so every maturity supports one of the masteries. They all kind of interrelate, but this specifically, there's some really nice pairings. And you would recognize from ID, uh, Grace, that the last 5 come from the IB model, because these give us tangibly, well, like, what do I look at if I want to ask about it? And so they all kind of go together and allow us to begin to think about what foundation does a person need, an emotional architecture, a sense of self, level of awareness that would allow them to be capable, in a way, of displaying that particular mastery. And so if I just take the first one, so personal maturity is uh, the things that a person can draw on from within themselves in service of other humans. And so this can be emotional intelligence, somatic awareness. It could be your own processing of your own life experience, your own comfort with diversity, anything that allows you to be a more evolved human, because that gives you more capacity to draw on things in yourself, but also help the other person do that. So the example would be if you've never really processed um, losses in your life, and you're now maybe coaching a group of people that have been laid off or their team has been disbanded or whatever, you're going to have less available to give to them because you've never done that work for yourself. And so most of us will tend to steer their conversation away from things that are uncomfortable for us. So if I want to be able to hold, so many of us have done this long enough. You've heard everything at some point in time from your clients, every emotion, everything. And so for me, it's less about what skills do I need. If I can't even hold space for this, if I can't tolerate it or be present to it myself, all of my skills in the world are moot. And so when I'm trying to help somebody recognize how can they increase their capacity, a lot of it I'm looking at what mindset did you bring into the session? And so that mindset is already sort of narrowing their choices and really helping them kind of unconsciously make some decisions about how they want to be with the other person, which means that all those things that don't fit in that mindset, the person either doesn't draw on at all or draws on in ways that may not be very beneficial for the client. So if I feel like for my own well-being or my own identity, my own sense of self, that I have to help my clients feel better about their problems, or the clients have to leave sessions with a solution. I'm going to look at things that are happening through that lens, and so I'm going to miss a whole bunch of things that actually might be more important for the client. And I'm not even going to draw on, for example, my powers of inquiry, because I've already kind of figured out what I think it's all about. I'll do the first three, then we'll stop and see if there's questions or thoughts. See if this is helping you get clearer, Jackie. And then I'll do the last two. So this for me is the foundation of everything. So we can only sort of travel as far as we are willing to go. And if we're not willing to go much further and somebody shows up in that space wanting our help, we're not going to be very effective for them. And the more that we feel trusting and confident in ourselves, the more we can risk seeing more things. And ultimately, all of this comes down to a deeper instinctive trust of ourselves. And for spiritual maturity, its contribution to this is it's one of its primary areas of focus is on the relationship. How am I in the relationship? How is this client relating to me? What are we seeing or not seeing? What are our blind spots? What are our projections and our transferences? And the aim of this, the mastery in this is clarity. The more we feel mature in this domain, the more we are going to allow ourselves to see, the more we can actually literally see. And so this is in service of aspiration, which has to do with values, has to do with intention, has to do with kind of how we help our clients be with each other in relationship. And so this is really important because a lot of times, like people don't see that, oh, here's an opportunity where you could have done X. They don't even see the opportunity. Or they don't see that what they just said seems to have been hurtful to the other person. They don't see how they've actually disempowered their team by micromanaging them and then getting mad because they're not performing. So maybe you don't even see your role and why your team is underperforming. And so this one is, again, it just allows us to just help people. Sometimes it's a matter of zooming in, sometimes it's a matter of zooming out, but it's all in service of how do we build a deeper relationship to do the work we need to do. So the third one is the one that's the most familiar to all of us. This is all the competency models are built on this. They're all about behaviors and what do we observe people doing. I see this is the primary building blocks. These are more about the basic process. Like, what are the core steps in a coaching conversation? What are the core kind of skills I need to even get the basic parameters of coaching? This is in some ways the easiest one to measure, but I would argue in some ways the least important after a certain point in time. And part of this is why I thought this was important is because competency models are great for beginners. They don't scale as well as you get farther up the developmental ladder, because in the end, when you look at somebody that's a complete master of a art or music or craft or coaching or whatever, they've actually learned all the rules so well they can now break them all as necessary to do the what's important or necessary for the client. And so over the years, and some of you would know this, when I've done demos, people would say, well, that's not coaching. And I say, well, A, who gets to decide what that was? And in the end, why does this really matter? Did you find this helpful? Did you observe that the person I was coaching find this helpful? And so people are measuring something less by was it effective and more by does it fit in the box that I've described X as including. And so I want to begin to use the 5 maturities to encourage us to be more of our authentic self, bring more of who we actually are, all the things we know that we don't often bring sometimes because it doesn't fit in what we think of as coaching. And I feel like we leave a lot of hard-earned wisdom and knowledge on the table because we sometimes feel bounded by things that may not actually be in our best interest and certainly not in the interest of people that we're working with. So I'm going to stop there for a minute because otherwise it's too much, and just see if there's questions or thoughts that come up about these first 3, and then I'll do a little practice with you to kind of show what they look like in action.
David, one of the things that I'm wondering is there do these 5 levels of maturity, I don't know what the question is, more around the interconnections,
Yes.
I suppose, more than anything else. Yeah.
Yeah, so I started in some ways with competency and built from there. I chose 5 because there's 5 elements of I-beam, and it seemed to cover the gamut from the deeply personal to the deeply systemic. So I thought it covered the range of things. All of these affect the others. And we had an example in this call earlier today of somebody that was coaching a leader that was really not tracking significant changes in their work environment, and then was surprised when things weren't working well. And so the person who was their coach was realizing that that to have to deal with the environment was too much for this person. So they actually asked them, so tell me how you were approaching this situation. So they described a bit about their mindset. And she realized that he was still coming from the mindset from the environment that used to be. And that was a much easier entry point for him to start looking at how he was really he wasn't that committed to or a believer in where the company was going. And he hadn't really fully realized that he was stubbornly holding on to the story he'd been telling from before. And so then when she started to work with him on his mindset, and then some things about what that meant that he wasn't seeing anymore, then he said, oh my gosh, there's all these things happening around me that I wasn't even paying any attention to because I didn't know how to deal with it. And I didn't want to have to deal with it because I didn't really believe in it anymore. Yeah, and so it's really just, in the thick of things. So they say you've had a disagreement with somebody. I find this for myself really helpful. Step back. which of these things in this moment might be most useful to me? And and so a lot of the work that we did in ID around third spaces and moving away from polarities is very helpful here to kind of say, where can I stand? How can I frame what's happening in a way that's going to open up some new possibilities that we both might grow from this? And if in the paper, you'll see that I've mapped this to a frame for, say, a coaching conversation that has all these 5 elements: the people, the relationships, the processes, the skills, and the outcome. And we're doing this partly because it makes us better people and better coaches, but also because the more we can do this for ourselves, the more we can do it for our clients, which is the whole point.
David.
Yes.
So you referenced I-beam and like my brain's like, I was trying to figure out I-beam's relationship. So what you're showing here, and I pulled up your paper. So I went to page 34 to your table where you have it there.
Yeah.
Can you help me understand like the connection? Like,
Yes.
is I-beam embedded in here? Is it next to, what's the relationship?
Yeah, so sorry about that. Yes. So years ago, when I was working on a big project for a client for several years in the coaching space, one of the things they were trying to use was a more sophisticated approach to coaching to help them reimagine how they were developing their leaders. So as part of that, they asked me to do sort of a meta-analysis of all the research on factors that affect performance at work. So I did, and I came up with 5. I somehow, I don't know if it's, and the one that was most commonly cited in the literature, and I read just dozens of papers, for example, was motivation. But motivation is sort of for me, a troublesome word, the way it's often used, and it didn't feel complete enough, so I changed it to aspiration. So each of these 5, mindset, aspiration, behavior, environment, and identity, are one of the 5, to me, from my research anyways, the core drivers of performance at work. One of the big things from our integrative development program is helping people to realize that many of the things that get in the way of people being more effective at work are not because of them. It's because of their environment. And a lot of our efforts to do training or coaching or anything ends up sending changed people back into unchanged environments, which we all know doesn't end well. And so we created ID so that people can change their environments while they're developing themselves. They're useful here because they're kind of anchors to, like if you tell somebody, I'd like to work on your capacity, they won't really know what that means. And what is that, right? But if I say, I'm curious of what mindset you were bringing to that conversation, most people have been around the block long enough to have a sense of what that means. And so it provides a way in. Competency and behavior is an obvious one, and I'll explain why environment is there, but yeah, so each one is kind of a new sort of focal point for where we would spend some of our energy to improve that maturity and mastery. Okay, and I'll explain that in the latter 2 because they would be more organizational in many ways. But does that help?
Mm-hmm.
Does it start? Okay. Well, let me just explain the other 2, and then we'll see what we have at the end. So, so I want to just so one of the things I've my first degree was in sociology. So one of the things I've tried to do in coaching all along is kind of ground everything that I do and teach in a more systemic understanding of humans. That individual psychology is important, growing the sense of agency and authorship in a person is great. But I felt like, and some of you have heard me say this before many times, but that we don't really reach the full potential of coaching because most of the time we have nothing to do with the person after they leave the session. But that's where they make most of the long-standing change. It doesn't really matter as much what they can do with us. It matters what they can do when they go home or go back to work. So social maturity for me is an astuteness, a discernment, a sense of wisdom about the environment that you're in, the ability to be agile and switch between, like if you've got a room full of 30 leaders, probably more so for you, Grace, than maybe for Jackie, is it? But who are maybe from 8 different countries. And somebody asks a question. You've got to give up to 8 different answers because the interpretation of the questions might be different for many of the participants. And you can't assume that your answer is going to mean to you what it means to them. So it's the capability, is the wisdom to use your competencies appropriately and effectively. And again, it's the whole thing about knowledge transfer. People can have these glorious experiences and programs, but out in the heat of the moment on the floor, are they going to actually remember any of that in that environment, which might be more hostile to them trying new things or more challenging? And so we're just asking people not only how well you can do this competency in service of the skills you're trying to develop in yourself or in somebody else, but that sense of wellness has also to do with wisely. How wisely can you do it? And so you see this in people, like in leaders who are really good at like strategic thinking and analysis, and they like speaking to what they've discovered. And so they have really strong skills of articulation. And so they use it a lot, even when it's not necessary or helpful. And so part of it is they're not tuning into their environment doesn't need that from you right now. That your capability is actually not very high because your skills are not being used in a way that's serving what either we are hoping for or the audience wants. And so a lot of it is helping our clients be much more aware of what's actually happening around them. So as they're making choices of what to say or do, it's with a greater sense of awareness about what's actually in front of them. And so we see a lot of beginning coaches working really hard. I got to learn how to ask open-ended questions. But then they get locked into that and think, well, that's what I'm supposed to do all the time. But there's many scenarios in which asking an open-ended question is not useful. Maybe the exact opposite of what the person needs. So that would be a skill you might have gotten good at, used in an inappropriate time. And therefore it's less effective. And then contextual maturity is the ability to take in all 5 of these at the same time. So like just be present to the entire context you're working in service of trying to help the client achieve outcomes. There's 2 things about this that are important. And one is, so this means that when you get closer to mastery of something, it tends to become part of who you are. It's your identity. You no longer have to think about it and go through the steps. It's just how you do things now. And so again, we're trying to help people that we're working with embody, embrace, and incarnate kind of what they're learning, so it becomes more and more of how they just naturally see and do things. And what that does, when you have high contextual maturity, you have a lot of credibility. And you have credibility for 2 reasons. One is that if I were to ask you what just happened, you could describe it to me because you understand the dynamics of what was just in play, and you're credible because I can follow the logic model that you use to kind of make those choices. And you can follow kind of the bouncing ball. And you have a sense of the inner dynamics of how things work, which then enables you to mix and match them. Because you can just read the context and say, I need a little bit of this and a little bit of that. It's also credible because it actually works. And so contextual maturity allows you to adapt as you're going through a coaching session or a leadership program or whatever you're doing in light of what's unfolding in the room. And so you're always reading the context for how you might want to respond next. And so for me, and then we sort of come back around. As you get better and better at that, you grow as a human being, and then you start on the cycle again. But then in a specific scenario, you're asking yourself, which of these 5 might shed some light of what I might pay attention to? So I'm going to stop there and see if there's any more questions or reflections.
So today's explanation has helped me so much understand what I read in the paper. So I'm looking currently at like page 47. You had a model there of sample questions to
Yeah.
ask yourself, right? Like, and I was reflecting on a coaching session today. It's like, can I identify where these elements emerged and how did I play my part or my role? And then I've got, visceral experience. I was thinking about another coaching session where I'm like, I can sense where my gap was. And so this is helping me a lot start to like, okay, how do when I can get to the theoretical to my application and back, now I'm starting to get it.
Good. Well, and again, this is trying to capture a lot of material, a lot of bodies of work kind of going into this. So I would be surprised if you'd get it right away. So I appreciate your honesty and sharing about your journey. And again, like we've done some fun things in the past, which we'll do again in the retreats, but we're going to have some opportunities for you to share in groups. And we're going to have one person tell a story that they're working on, and then we're going to give each of you one of the maturities to listen for and start sharing what did you pick up that gave you a clue that this maturity was in play or not in play, as the case may be. And it's really just, for me, part of this came is not only from the research paper that I was pointed to from ICF, but we did some pilot projects last year for Ovida, this AI company that's doing some really cool things to help improve coaching skills. And what we observed was that that people would record an entire coaching session, even though we told them not to, because they wanted to see how it ended. They didn't want to just practice the skill. They wanted to see a whole session, which was fine. But then they ended up with all these opportunities of things to address. And most of them didn't know where to start. And B, even more so, they didn't know what to do about the things they found. And because anyways, it's a long story about why I think that is that way. But so a lot of it for me was, if nothing else, ask yourself, what perspective should I take here that would help me learn something? And this provides one way of languaging that. There's 5 ways you could look at this. And does it describe everything perfectly? No. Does it cover everything? Probably not. But it starts with 5 more than we had before to begin to think about where can I direct the client's attention to help them understand what scaffolding they're going to need to enact what they've just decided they want to go do. Yeah.
So I just want to say thank you, Jackie, at the beginning when you talk about the sort of language and the words, and I get it, because as I was looking at these pictures, there's lots of, I suppose, the bias of what those words might mean to me, right? And when you go to the practice of it, that's when you think, wow, this is where it's moving to. That's more helpful, because a word can mean so many different things to different individuals. So thanks, Jackie, for highlighting that earlier.
Yeah. And again, go ahead, Jackie.
I was just gonna say, right, like that's sort of a fascination of like how our minds work, right? The confirmation bias of when we're trying to learn something new that's complex, of the brain is like searching for what is this similar to, or what is it like, to see if I can understand it. But it doesn't really match up, right? So then the learning feels stuck, at least like I'm sort of noticing my own learning experientially in the moment. And that's in the process of grasping a new understanding and a new way of looking at it.
Yeah. And I just look at the 5 of them as windows to look at a conversation through.
Yeah.
we're not going to teach you spiritual maturity. A, because I couldn't, but B, because that's not really the point. They're more just like buckets that we put things in, or windows we look through. And my one of my biggest points, even beyond the specifics of the maturities, is I think we often do a grave. I mean, there's sort of a. I find the distinctions between like horizontal and vertical development interesting, but not very useful after a while, because development goes in many directions. But it was helpful to bring that distinction in because I think we had a limited view of development. But why is I saying that? So the main thing is to be able to help people recognize that those of us as practitioners, and I look back to my early days as a trainer and a coach, and I was completely missed this whole point. We have this assumption that if I teach something valuable to somebody that they like, that they're going to actually go do that. And there again, there's just so many things in play that need to be in play for somebody to be able to get better at something. And so we tend to focus more on the skills because they're the easiest thing to kind of model and demonstrate and talk about and deconstruct. But there's just so much that would need to go underneath that to be able to support a person to actually not only learn that skill, but to use it well. And I think for me, if nothing else from this paper, if we introduce maturity as something we want to track in how we develop people, that would be a win. So.
Grace and Jackie, I'll offer that I've had the opportunity to sit with this material on a couple of different occasions. I've been co-hosting with David for some of these sessions and did this 6-week experience. And I've been challenging myself and been settling into just not trying to too rigidly preconceive what each of these maturities is, but just with each time that I'm considering them or I'm sitting with the discussion, just to get curious about what is showing up with each of them in that moment. And it shifts. Even sitting here listening to this conversation compared to what I was experiencing this morning, it's shifted, and it's not shifting in necessarily a direction that's taking me away from what I've gathered, but maybe a deepening and integration with each experience, and just trying to be curious about what that can mean for me, which may be different for someone else.
Yeah, thank you.
I just want to add to that. I think going through this, David, it was really helpful, even though I'm in the LYL program. I feel like I've learned a whole bunch. And a big thing, I think, for me was getting caught up on some of the words and letting it go makes such a big difference.
Yes. Yeah, and so most of the time in the retreat's actually going to not be spent on this slide or anything like this slide. I've designed some activities and assignments for you that I feel are good representations or good avenues to explore for each of these 5. See you and give you opportunities to think about for yourself and therefore for your clients. How could I use some of these kinds of ways of working for clients I discern might need some help in this area? So it would all be about experiencing the 5 maturities. It's in the sense of you addressing things that you've decided that are important to you, and how this might be help you to deal with that. Yeah. So would you like to do a practice now, or would you like to learn more about the retreat? What would be useful for you right now? Do you have any preferences?
I'm
think
keen
I'd
to
want-
learn more about the retreat.
Same with me.
Jackie?
Yeah, I'd like to learn about the retreat.
Okay. All right, I'm going to move to that slide then. Yeah, I just want to share, move here. So let me just read this and I'll share a couple things about it that feel important to me, about the retreat. So part of what feels here is, it's called the guiding lights, and for some people that was conjuring an image of a kind of a lone lighthouse on a cliff in some remote island or something. It's not that, and more is, many of you have heard me tell my story about the fireflies. It's more about, like in this picture, where can I bring light to what's being presented in front of me, and to do that in concert with other people. Um, and so, like Helen, you might discover there are other people in the retreat next year who are also sorting out grief issues and loss issues. You guys might decide to meet and say, how have we matured or not matured as much as we would like in relationship to these losses in our life? And and help sort of shine some light for each other to kind of move through whatever is important for you to move through. The other thing that is sort of becoming, two other things are becoming clearer as this work's unfolding over the last year. One is the power of learning from your environment, rather than feeling like we've learned it all inside ourselves, but actually, what is your environment teaching you about the moment you're in, but also for later. So we're going to give you a number of assignments that have to do with keen observation of your own environments. It's a way to be in kind of dialogue with what's happening around you, so that you can find ways to show up in the environment in ways and learn from the environment that might be more productive for you. What was the second thing? I just blanked. Maybe it'll come back. Oh yes. The second thing is that some of the practices that you'll have in the retreat will actually have some prompts around how I would like to invite you to speak about things. Not because I'm saying you should speak about them that way all the time, but one of the things we found in some of our earlier retreats that we did, was that people would talk quite clearly about things, but not from themselves. And part of the maturity work and part of the origins of where maturation comes from is simplicity, directness. And so we're going to sort of support you in finding new ways of talking about certain things that allow you to get to the core of what's actually happening much sooner. And I find this a really helpful skill with my clients, to get them to stop going around in circles to talk about things, but actually to just really hone in on what are you actually really trying to say here. And for me, it sort of changed how I do a lot of my work, and I found that really, really powerful. And I've done more and more now to teach this to leaders and others to have that skill themselves in their own practices. So, so this is the sort of nuts and bolts of this the session, and then I'll kind of show you what that looks like in full form. But there's 12 live sessions. 10 of them will be around the maturities themselves, so 2 for each maturity, and then 1 beginning and 1 ending at sort of typical times for us. And they will always be recorded, so if you miss one, you can always listen to it later. We're going to have resources and assignments for you, both for you personally and also for your pod, like we've done before. But these are going to be probably more prescriptive and more detailed, because I want to really hone in on what might they say about your maturity. And yeah, and so that, again, as always, you're welcome to adapt them or ignore them or do whatever you need to be doing. But we want to create plenty of resources for you to understand what that maturity means for you, regardless of what I called it, and what it might offer you in terms of developing yourself. There'll be a forum, as I was saying to you, Helen. We're going to really encourage people to find other people in similar journeys, so you can have some more in-depth conversation about things that are particularly present for you in your life. We're going to have some small peer pods and some support for that. And then one of the things we're doing differently that we are doing now in the Lighten Your Load is the handbook that we've traditionally given out is going to be much longer, and it's going to have space for some of the key slides or frames for each of the sessions, as well as spaces for you to take notes. So it's all right there for you in one place. And what that looks like is like this. So we'll have sort of an integration session at the end of each pairing of maturities and an initiation session that starts. And in between, we're going to give you, like I said, some assignments. These are all very much about experience or and direct relationship, whatever you decided is your purpose for being on the retreat. Just like in narrative coaching, we don't make any assumption that you're going to stay with your original intention, but we are going to keep checking in with you about what are you here for and how can we help you fulfill the purpose you now are clear you'd like to spend your time on. Yeah, and there's opportunities for you to continue to journal throughout the whole program as things come up or you try new things, and a way for you to keep all of that in one place. So we have the material, your responses to the material, as well as your overall reflections on your time in the program, kind of all in one place. Yeah, and then the other thing is we ran a program for a year during the pandemic called Narrative Release. And I was just musing one day as I was working on something with the Five Maturities, and I realized that the 5 things we taught in that program actually have a real direct connection to the 5 Maturities and these retreats. So we're going to put some bonus material on each of these 5 things in each of the sections on one of the maturities, to give you some language and some resource, either for the first time, if that's new for you, or as a reminder for those of you who've been in the program before, as a way to give you some language and some sort of structuring about how you might think about something like spiritual maturity, and how things like, how do I tend to show up with my clients? What kind of clients do I do best with? What kind of client relationships do I struggle with, and why might that be? What clients annoy me, and why is that? So we're going to use these not only to give you a deeper understanding of that maturity, but also some tools then you can use to help other people who would like to grow in that area. So I think that will be quite fun. And let's see if there's anything else that feels important. And let's come to this if I can find this one. Yeah. So many of you will recognize this slide. It's one of my all-time favorites. So one of my purposes for creating all this in the first place was, again, just watching so many people struggle because they left so much off the table, in terms of who they were, what they knew, what they'd done, what other skills and arts and crafts and things they have that might actually be useful, if nothing else, in helping them conceive of coaching differently. And so we're going to help you. One of the things we're going to do with you every single week is, what do you already know about this? What things have you already invested in that help you be better at this? And what could you use more of it in your work if you gave yourself permission? And so we're going to, as always in our ID land, we're going to channel these 2 children who are, well, these people are talking or looking cool or falling down or pretending they're learning how to ski. These kids are just skiing. So we're going to give you plenty of opportunities just to go downhill. and so that you can not just sort of learn about the maturities, but actually encounter them and engage them and be challenged by them as we go through the program. And I guess the last thing I'll say, then I'll stop and see what you might want to offer. But one of the things that I think is really unfortunate is that the word immature is seen as a stigma or a judgment. I just think it's a state of being, that we all have areas of our life where we're less mature than others or less mature than we'd like to be. And so I want to sort of normalize it's okay to be immature. Not all the time in every front of your life, but if we have this sort of level of shame, I should be a bigger man, or I should be stronger, or it's very difficult to learn from that space. And so part of why we're bringing in things like grief and shadow and attachment work is to help you allow yourself to be at peace with areas you discover you may not be as mature as you'd like. Yeah. So I'm going to stop there, and then this is just where you can find more information if you want. You can reach out to Steve on our team if you have more questions. But for now, I'm just going to take this down and see what questions you might have.
I've been all over your website. I can't find a link to what you just showed us
This one here in the middle.
with the guiding light retreat. Like, is it in a?
I'll post the
know.
link in the chat.
All right, thank you.
There it is.
How
Mm.
much?
What's that?
How much?
It's on I'm just going to the page to see what it. Yeah, it's there. It does work.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah, I had me panicked there. That wasn't working. So this is what it costs. So if you've done things with us before, then it's less, because we want to honor those who are graduates. And if you're not, if this is your beginning of your journey with us, then that's what it costs. Yeah.
Did you mean to show a slide or?
Oh, I am. I'm looking at this beautiful slide I've made.
Wow, sing it.
Do show.
Yes.
Yeah.
Why are they looking so confused? Because I stopped sharing. Yeah. 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 So this is where you can find, there's a bunch of FAQs on the page. You can sign up there if you're interested. And be happy to answer any more questions you have after this. Jackie, I saw that Georgiana signed up yesterday. That was nice to see. Yeah.
How big are the pods, David?
We're going to try to keep them quite small, and we're going to do it in a very similar fashion as we did for Lighten Your Load, rather than the chaos of trying to make them yourself, or try to force feed them too much. We're going to just allow you to sign up for a time slot that works for you. And when a time slot's filled, then we'll just close out that time slot so nobody else can sign up. But we're going to keep them fairly small at 3 or 4 people. So it's enough critical mass to have some diversity, but also more intimacy, because again, some of this stuff can be quite personal, which is what we're hoping. And we don't, if it gets too big, then it just gets too cumbersome, and it feels less safe for some people, and it takes longer than you might want. And so we're going to make them small and agile, and let you, again, particularly as you start to focus in on what do you most want to get from this for yourself, either personally or professionally or both, how can your group help you? And so we need people that you trust, that you build a relationship with. So we want to keep the groups relatively small.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. Can you also connect with other people who are planning on doing it and say we want to be in this group together?
You could do that. If you well, you can, when Steve opens up the registration page for small groups, you can all just sign up for the same time if you want to do that way. Or if you know in advance there's people you want to be with. We're not going to play too much of a matchmaker, but
Yeah.
it gets really hard for Steve. But
Yeah.
if you know in advance you've got a group already formed, you can just tell Steve and we'll give you a time slot that you want.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sounds good, David. And I see that you've got 2 times each for each session. So
Yes.
that's really helpful.
Yeah. And one of the things that was important to me about this work is it started out as an academic exercise um, through the Institute of Coaching in a way as a sponsor in the beginning. But I wrote the whole thing when I had long COVID badly. And it was a fascinating cognitive or not cognitive experience. And I started using this work as it was evolving in my own mind and on paper to help myself. I found this profoundly helpful. It's part of why I'm in Amsterdam and not back in Portland, was the work I did trying out a bunch of this on myself. And I feel I've had now 2 occasions in the last 2 weeks of seeing people that haven't seen me for a while, and they said, "You're different now." And I said, "Well, almost dying helps, but more doing this work is yeah, I had to confront some things about myself. I thought, I thought I was past that, but apparently not." And some grief, like with you, Helen, that I had not fully processed, and now I have, and some making some big choices about my family of origin that I feel free now in a way I've never felt my whole life. Yeah, and so my time is exploring these maturities and the concept of maturity. I don't find the stage models very helpful to me. I think they're interesting academically, but it doesn't, in real life, I'm not sure that it's as helpful as we might want them. And whereas this feels like if we can start to understand, can we create environments or experiences that help people accelerate their maturation? How cool would that be? Right? At a time when the world seems to be devolving and moving, becoming less mature, I think this would be quite valuable. So, yeah.
I do wonder at the end, David, whether the stages and this might have some sort of
I think they will. Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, I think they're useful, but I remember years ago, and actually somebody was in a session outside of MI I was doing for somebody else, and they were actually in the session where I said this the first time, but there was this special interest group on adult development for SHRM, I think. And they asked me to come talk about some of the early days of this years ago, but and I put up Suzanne Cook-Reuter's bell curve of stages, which, and I have great respect, and I like her work a lot, and I find it interesting. But I said to them, we're in the business one way or another of trying to move the curve. And I said, I'm going to offer the proposition that the entire curve is raised over time with literacy, with better economic conditions, with more travel, blah, blah, blah. I said, but I would argue that that curve has not changed at all since the dawn of time in terms of the relative proportion of people who are in relative places. And I said, so for me, then I started thinking about all the effort we put in to move people to the right on the curve. How much of that actually works, and how much of that is more circumstance, their own initiative? And I said, wouldn't it be more useful for us to raise the entire curve for everyone? And you see this a lot, and for me, it's digress a bit, but it's I think part of the roots of populism in the sort of negative ways we're seeing it express itself. People feel neglected, overlooked, not part of the game, looked down on, etc. What if and so like we're all creating all these programs for people that have money and time And what about people that don't have those things, but need this just as much as we do? And so I started thinking about then maturity very differently. I'm not interested in moving people to the right on the curve. I'm helping them elevate the curve wherever they are. And so that just felt like it was really important to me. And I think that in time there'll be an interesting interplay. If we got better at maturing people rather than worrying about where they are, would that help us, rather than label them as yellow or red or any of those kind of things, actually help us show up at any moment in time, to help bring more maturity to the situation? That feels like a more valuable life endeavor than trying to force somebody to go this way and become more complex in their thinking or more whatever. And I feel like, as we do with everything, starting from a place of situate, and noticing what we find and going from there.
I get it. It's great because one of the things is, even with the curve, you move back and forth
Of course.
depending on all those things you talk about, right? Particularly with environment. And
Yeah.
so part of me am thinking, if you're at a certain level on the curve, there are certain things in the 5 maturities you can lean into and others you can't yet reach.
Yes.
And if you work on the 5 maturities, and you help people move, then concurrently on the curve, they're moving as well.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
yeah.
I totally can see that. Yeah. Yeah. I spent a lot of my early career creating curves like that for different things I worked on. And which was very titillating at the time, but and as I got older, I started to realize this isn't making any difference at all. I finally realized probably not. And I got much more interested in how do I help meet people where they are and move in a direction that's valuable to them.
The image of snakes and ladders come to mind.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
It feels a bit to me when I think about, adult development theory, whether you're thinking about Cook-Reuter or Torbert or Keegan's work. And I'm thinking about the 5 maturities, David. It feels like with the adult development, like, it makes sense. I believe more in fluidity and back and forth and some choice and fallback, right? Not just a rigid, and the goal is to get, more expanded. But when I look at the 5 maturities, there's a greater depth. There's a greater depth and maturity going on. And so I sort of have this sense or feeling in this moment of my learning that the 5 maturities feels like there's more resonance as an individual's at redefining, transforming, right? Like that's the playground, if you will, for the maturities. Some of that is coming from the lens of I'm up in that area of playing, right? And so when I'm with clients that are also playing it, like then we're in a similar sandbox together. And lots of times, right, in coaching, people are in an earlier form of mind, if you will, right? And it's more the curiosity has not ignited. There's not the interest in some of these other things. So I perceive like I'm bringing, like elements of the 5 maturities and I'm playing with that, but I'm still trying to meet somebody where they are. So right now, I would put these 5 maturities, not that they're out on that end, but they don't even start to make sense really from a complexity perspective until somebody is really in that place of curiosity and redefining and reframing and all of those kinds of things.
Yeah. So yes, and I totally agree with you. And I would say it's also not true in the sense that so I'm trying to go in the opposite direction.
Okay.
Where that complexity is not required at all. Because we're not, like with the client, I'm not going to show them the whole thing. I use this all the time. I use them in my mind. What is this person missing? And if they're self-aware at all, I might ask them, like, what are you missing here? Like, what's not happening? What do you, and then they might, either they become aware of something or I might help them become aware of something. And all I'm doing is just doing one thing. And so I was sharing in an earlier call today I was just so many of my influences for the work come from people like Moshe Feldenkrais. And so one of my maxims when I'm working, what is the smallest meaningful intervention I can make? And then as you're right, but this is where I think it's the yes part to what you're saying. As they start to get more comfortable with complexity and multi-levels, then you can say, well, how does that connect to this? And you can start then drawing the whole map for them. But in the beginning, you might just do one thing. And you might even not even tell them that this is a maturity. You might just say,
Right.
where's your, like if you ask somebody, what's your blind spot here? What did you not see? Right?
Yes, my yes and is though, right? Like you're bringing that because you have this
Yes.
complexity going on, whereby, right, the person you're coaching may not, right? So it is like bringing in like that
Yes.
question.
Yeah.
One of the things though that intrigues me that this more static model is helpful for is it's a good like level one introduction to people who've never seen this stuff before, right? Not
Sure.
going into all the theories, like here's your colored model, here's the ladder, where's your center of gravity, right? And then we talk about fluidity and choice and all of those kinds of things. So I do like that model from like as an introduction, as a 101. It's for many people that I'm coaching, it's the first time they've ever thought about how they think.
Yes.
Like
That's
they
true.
never pondered that question before, right? And I love that your model is making me do the same thing about a whole lot of stuff.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. I
So
think it's
who did you say you were following though that said what's the smallest, most
Moshe
meaning?
Feldenkrais.
Thank you.
He was an Israeli engineer and was badly wounded, and they told me he would never walk again. And he said, "I'm an engineer; I can fix anything." And what he did was, and he had also had a deep spiritual background too, but um, he he um, he de he developed it started out as physical rehabilitation, but what he said, I have to go back to the beginning and teach myself to walk again. And so he started studying babies and like, how do babies learn how to walk in the first place? And so what that means is like one of the classic things that I do all the time with people is just like put your arm out as far as you can go, you know, backwards, right? And then we just keep swinging it and don't even think about it. Just keep swinging it. And pretty soon it's like going way behind you. And you could have sworn all it could go was here. And so so much of their work is what is the smallest movement you can make to activate a different constellation of things in your body. And so a lot of the work in ID and in the Five Maturities is again, um, what is the smallest thing I can offer them that they can get started on the journey they need to be on? And so people um, like I can think of a couple of occasions when I was demoing coaching, and I would just invite the client. What do you notice? Would you be willing to just sit back in your chair a bit? Oh, and then it activates a different part of their brain. I go, hmm. Whereas before they've been, and now they're, hmm. And I'm not telling them what to think or what to do. I just said, what if you just lean back for a minute and see what happens? And so for me, that's again, I agree. A lot of people like maps and they like orientations. Like, what is this thing I'm supposed to be doing and talking about? And the reality is they don't remember any of it when they're in the heat of the moment and they're in the meeting and they're having a hard discussion. And so I want to give them little micro anchors and somatic awarenesses that they can, and maybe key words or key anything that will allow them in the moment to activate that memory and act from a different place. And yeah. Is there anything else I can do for you tonight? Tonight for me, it's morning for Grace. midday for the rest of you.
I just want to say thanks for your time, David. I'm definitely interested.
Great.
Yeah. Thank you.
You're most welcome. Thank you, Tracy, for helping us hold space. Appreciate it very much. And let us know if we can be of help, and I hope you come join us in January.
All right. Take care. Bye.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone.
Right. Bye.